Good morning and good afternoon to this special session on a post-summit, sort of a post-mortem of the India-UK relationship after a summit, a virtual summit held between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Boris Johnson. With me today are two foreign policy specialists, Joe Johnson, the Harvard Kennedy School, and Ashok Malik, Additional Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. Welcome, Joe. Welcome, Ashok. To start things off, let me begin by asking both of you how you see the India-UK relationship post the summit. Did you think the summit was a kind of a milestone? I mean, we've been very close partners for decades. So why was the summit more important than others? Joe, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Indrani. And great to have this conversation with you and with Ashok. I think the first thing to say is the summit, it was going to be a really big event. The UK was looking forward to it tremendously. It was the first big intended to follow the first big prime ministerial visit to India since this prime minister came into office, and that underscored the importance that India has in the UK's overall global outlook. So it was a shame, obviously, that it didn't have the full impact that it would have had as a person-to-person occasion, with all of the surrounding meetings that happen in the environment of a big summit. But that said, it was an important step in the development of the relationship and a further warming up of a relationship that has always promised a lot, but sometimes for various reasons failed to deliver and to fulfill all of its potential. So I think it was a positive series of announcements around trade, around people-to-people ties, around areas of focus in terms of the shared challenge we have in combating COVID, climate change, other issues around biodiversity, and highlighting all of the areas in which we can work more closely together in education, in aid in third countries, aid and development in third countries, and in doing more together in research. So it was a useful relationship, a useful summit. And I think the key thing is that it underscored the extent to which I think the stars are kind of aligning now more than they have in recent years for further progress in the relationship. And from the way I see it, I think this is happening principally for two big reasons. The first big reason is we've got clearly now much more energy coming into it as a result of, one, the rise of a kind of techno-authoritarian China and the strong sense that India's rise to global prominence, regional preeminence, is in the interests of all democracies. India is a strategic partner for the UK and many other nations. It's seen as a dependable partner in the Indo-Pacific, a dynamic market-based emerging economy, and a core member above all of the club of democracies. So it's a core strategic partner for the UK, as for so many others. And then the second big reason is related to what's going on in the UK. We've now concluded our trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. We now have the parameters of the broad relationship that the UK is going to have to the EU and the single market. And so we're much more in a position to put some flesh on the idea of this global Britain concept, one of the government's big ideas for how it's going to make a success of Britain's post-Brexit role. And India clearly has an important part to play in that. If you read the government's integrated review, which is the first sort of comprehensive attempt to articulate what global Britain means is, it does give an important role to India and the Indo-Pacific, which is clearly very central to the government's vision of Britain's future engagement with the world beyond its borders. So that's the backdrop to the virtual summit. And I think the virtual summit did a good job under the circumstances of trying to build on the sort of generally favorable backdrop against which it was taking place.
Thank you. Ashok, how do you see this from the point of view of India?
Thanks, Indrani, and thanks, Joe. Nice to join you here. I'd like to answer that question by talking of the broader picture first and then coming down to specifics. Both India and the UK, from their different vantage positions, are navigating a new world. Britain is at the center of a strategic triangle, if you will. Europe is one vertex. The United States and transatlantic relationship is another vertex. Asia is obviously a third vertex, and India is very important in that context. India, too, is reimagining its relationship with the West. And this is evident from our recent sets of meetings. The Prime Minister had summits with the British Prime Minister and then with the entire EU leadership. The Foreign Minister has just been in Washington for a series of very productive meetings. In this relationship, the UK is obviously a very important vertex for us. And the summit took place in that context. What the summit did was draw up a roadmap for the next decade. Not all milestones in that roadmap will be achieved tomorrow morning or next year. But over the decade, this relationship will be transformed. There are really about half a dozen buckets here. The first is, of course, trade and investment. We both contribute enormously to each other's economies. That can only grow. We can complement each other's economies much more in a world where both are looking for a more equitable globalization. Second, in terms of contribution to emerging global challenges such as climate change and health, again, there's much we can do for each other and with each other and for the world. Third, the global norms basket in everything from the global commons, the maritime commons and how they are secured, global technologies, especially emerging technologies and how they are secured, and reforming multilateral institutions. And finally, working together in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is a vast space. We can work together in the Western Indian Ocean. We can work together in the Gulf. We can work together in other parts. These are the broad buckets which will define our relationship going ahead. And of course, undercutting all of them is an enormous human-to-human contact.
So the UK has been one of the largest destinations for, say, Indian investment. It has been a very attractive place for trade, commerce, etc. We have sort of struggled with an FTA, with the idea of a post-Brexit FTA for a couple of years now. And we haven't even started negotiations on the FTA. I mean, for everybody who says that a trade partnership is going to happen, frankly, we haven't even identified the teams. They haven't even met. So why should anybody believe that what the negotiations are coming up with would be very different or from what we have already? I mean, we have everybody. We have a very close economic relationship. In fact, when the UK was with the EU, our strongest relationship was with the UK. What will be our big takeaway in this enhanced trade partnership?
You know, actually, much work has happened on the trade front, and I think there's a new realism and a new energy in both our countries. If you look at the people driving the trade relationship in India, It's the Commerce Ministry, essentially, Minister Piyush Goyal. It's also the Finance Ministry because there's an important investment component. So Nirmala Sitharaman, the minister, comes in there. And of course, backstopping both of them is the Ministry of External Affairs and Foreign Minister Jaishankar. This is a team that wants to deliver results. This is I'm not comparing it to previous teams, but there is a new sort of focus. It's also, in a sense, easier to do a deal with the UK now that the UK is not part of Europe, because a lot of issues with the UK were not UK-specific issues, but were European issues that impeded a stronger trade relationship with the UK, and some of them are now behind us. Having said that, there are still some niggles we have to clarify. For instance, a global Britain, a European Singapore, if you will, would be certainly very useful to India, and will also find India and Indian talent and Indian efficiencies of great use. But it will have to compete for Indian talent and Indian investment with other centers in Europe. It didn't have to compete till a few years ago, but now it will. And this will require, for instance, we have a conversation happening on social security. This will require that to be taken forward, because the UK is still a very important and appealing destination for Indian investment and for Indian talent. But it's not the only one.
So, Joe, let me bring you to something that we have all been wrestling with for the last couple of months, and which is the response to COVID. We are in the middle of probably the worst COVID surge in the world so far. And the numbers are off the charts in every possible respect. This week also in London, we saw a kind of a Netflix documentary of Dominic Cummings' testimony to the British Parliament on the UK's handling of the crisis. What would you say are your learnings from this? And is there something that the two countries, from specifically your context, and is there something the two countries can take away, or something the two countries can build on in this new enhanced partnership that we're looking at?
Sure. I'll come to COVID in just a second, Indrani. I just wanted to follow up on Ashok's thoughts around trade. Sure. I would agree. There is a new energy, and there's a very focused negotiating team in London led by Liz Truss, the trade minister, who is determined to secure trade agreements around the world that bring to life, the idea that there are benefits from Brexit, of not being part of the EU's competence in trade policy. So I would say securing a trade agreement with countries like Australia, India, and others in that category is a really important litmus test for the success of Brexit. And I would observe that there is new energy on both sides too. I think that we are in a climate geopolitically in which a lot of countries are thinking about the resilience of their supply chains. A lot of companies are thinking about how to build greater slack in their operations. And India has an opportunity to be a big part of that story. But to fully capitalize on that opportunity, I think India probably recognizes that it needs to present a friendly face to inward investment from other countries, and to open up areas of the economy that might have been previously harder to access. So there's an opportunity for India, which I think it's fully alive to, that's arising from these new concerns that COVID has highlighted around the vulnerability of supply chains, particularly of critical items, which we're living through right now with the COVID response. On COVID sort of specifically, look, no one is out of the woods until everybody is out of the woods on COVID. There is no sense of complacency in the UK. Obviously, the government has had a successful rollout of the vaccine program, and that has taken case numbers right down in the UK. But the government is exceptionally alert to the risk that's posed by the development of new strains, some of which are evident now in towns in the Midlands in the UK. So there is no complacency in the UK, and there is a strong desire for the UK to play its part in helping ensure that the whole world can come through this crisis at the fastest possible rate, and wants to work with India as best it can to ensure that India can play its full part in manufacture of vaccines, in accessing IP to produce vaccines that are covered by patents and so on. So there's a strong spirit of wanting to work very closely with India as it goes through its own experiences right now. And there is a deep sense of being in it together with India on this question.
Thank you, Joe. Ashok, the COVID surge that we are in the middle of is not merely a viral virulence, is it? Because it has also shown up a lot of gaps in governance, in government planning. Because as the 5th largest economy in the world, our citizens should not actually be dying because they cannot access oxygen. There has been a lot of exposure of the governance deficit, of infrastructure deficit. How does that impact the India story? And how does that impact India as we try to attract investment or try to attract international attention?
Indrani, there certainly has to be a reckoning of what went right and what went wrong in the second wave. But do remember, we are not unique. Every country has faced at least one, maybe successive debilitating surges, which have overwhelmed its individual health system. The UK faced it a year ago. New York last summer was terrible. India this spring has been very badly hit. We had perhaps modeled for twice the number of people who fell ill to COVID in 2020. We got 4.25 times the number in terms of a daily average. And with those sort of numbers, any system could get overwhelmed. I'm not trying to make excuses here, but the fact is the numbers were huge. And faced with such numbers, anyone would be in trouble. We did ramp up oxygen production. Oxygen production between February and May almost doubled, medical oxygen production in India. But there were still problems. But as Joe said, none of us is safe till everyone is safe. No significant geography, whether economic geography or geography defined in terms of population, is safe till every other significant geography is safe. Till Birmingham is safe, Bangalore is not safe, and so on. That is the immediate answer, and I guess that will require all of us to push vaccination in the next 12 months across the world. There is a broader story emerging as well. Health is becoming a very important instrument of global politics and a key metric of national power. This is an emerging story over the next 4 to 5 years. And this is where a UK-India health partnership, which is what we've been talking about, can be extremely useful. It can be useful to us in our domestic systems. It can be useful as as an offering for the world. So in terms of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics, we could co-invent with perhaps more of the invention in the UK and supporting invention or development in India. We could co-produce perhaps more of the production here. We could have our innovators and scientists working much more closely. We could produce vaccines and diagnostics for really the world. Also, we could use each other's capacities to strengthen our domestic health systems. So, Indian medical professionals and health professionals, Indian generics companies and their products, making for a more efficient and cost-effective and responsive NHS, or UK health systems and technologies, helping us with our more ambitious health systems rollout in India, which is a crying need. There's so much opportunity that lies ahead, and health really was an area which had, I wouldn't say been ignored, but been underappreciated till this pandemic. It's given us a new opportunity, and we should grasp it.
So interesting, Ashok, that you spoke about a reckoning. And I go back to my previous question, and there, I don't know whether there will be an actual reckoning that the testimony that we spoke about earlier talked about. But because it's not merely a health issue, it's also a governance issue. I keep repeating this because in both countries, we have seen lapses in governance. Do you expect, for both of you, do you expect a reckoning in terms of fixing responsibilities and taking away lessons that the public can share as we go along? Ashok.
Look, we certainly have to be better prepared for a future pandemic or future health crisis. And I'll go back to something Joe said earlier. This includes strengthening systems. This includes building redundancies for critical health and sort of disaster-related products. This means depending on more than one geography for sourcing such products, whether they be N95 mask or diagnostic kits. Some of those geographies could be in other countries, partner countries, trusted countries. Some of that sourcing could be in other countries, partner countries, trusted countries. Some of that sourcing will be in-house, and we'll have to build capacities at home. Britain will have to, and so will India, and so will many other countries. So I think there will be lessons learned. There will also be a lot of bottom-up pressure from our people that will demand that the mistakes that were made this time, or I wouldn't say mistakes, the gaps that were evident this time are filled. But I'll tell you one thing, if there is a third or a fourth wave in any country of similar numbers, other gaps will emerge. No country is geared or hardwired to deal with literally millions of patients coming in to the hospital system every week.
Yeah, I would
Joe, if I may just add to that question for you. Just prior to the summit, I interviewed Prime Minister Johnson, and he said in answer to a question that he thought that the AstraZeneca Serum Institute, Oxford University relationship that created the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we call Covishield in India, was actually kind of the global template, or rather a template for health, a health relationship. As you answer this, could you also look at what the future might be for a health partnership?
And it was a great template. I'm the happy recipient of 2 AstraZeneca jabs, second one yesterday, which I imagine was made by the Serum Institute. So I'm personally very grateful to it. I think Ashok is right to highlight the potential for research partnerships generally as well between the UK and India. I would say there's something of a research collaboration gap, which presents a big opportunity. Clearly, there is a striking partnership that's already been put into place on vaccine manufacturing, which is great. But if you actually look at who the UK is doing its collaborative international research with, from sort of 36,000 feet, it's not doing that much with India right now. We're doing a hell of a lot with China. China is about to overtake the US as our #1 collaborative research partner, a striking development given that it was in 9th position among our partners a decade ago. India is still in 17th position in terms of the number of collaborative partnerships with UK institutions. So there is scope for us to ramp up the rate of collaboration. And to do that, we need to really focus on it and ensure that there are collaborative structures that facilitate institutions reaching out to each other and doing more together. That does require the lubrication of funding, and there are good programs which can be built upon, such as UKERI and others like it, the Global Challenge Research Fund, Newton, and so on. But that I see as a big growth area for the relationship, is getting brilliant scientists and researchers in India to work with their counterparts in the UK, and we can do so much together. And the value of that collaborative research and the impact of it when we do work together is really very striking. When you look at the category normalized citation impact, which measures on a normalized basis how frequently cited research is that's done in collaborative structures, is very, very strong. And so and it's good value for money for the public funders of that activity. So we should focus on it and do more of that together. But on your question, Indrani, about the reckoning.
Yes.
Look, the reckoning. From my position, observing what's going on, I think in the UK, of course, the government was confronted by an extraordinary, unprecedented circumstance, which is the global pandemic. Planning could have been better for it. I don't think anyone is going to deny that we were having to take decisions and make policy on the hoof. And there are certainly going to be, there certainly will be an inquiry to examine, why we weren't better prepared when the pandemic hit. But once the pandemic did hit, of course, there were decisions that had to be taken in a hurry, and not all of the decisions were correct. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But when I see it, I see the government basically getting 3 or 4 big things right. The first big thing that it got right was that it put a sort of a protective arm around family finances through the so-called furlough scheme. Yeah. So people could guarantee that they would get 80% of their income if their employers had to temporarily take them off the company payroll. That was a very important prop to the economy and to the sort of the psychology of the country. Second thing is the health service didn't collapse. Our NHS was able to continue to provide health services, albeit under extreme pressure at times throughout the crisis. And then the third thing I would point to is that, fundamentally, the government was able to distribute a vaccine effectively in time, thanks to the Serum Institute, collaborations with India on the manufacturing, thanks to the work of our scientists at Oxford, and thanks to the logistical capabilities of the NHS, we did manage to get the vaccine to our most vulnerable populations in a pretty speedy way. So those are 3 big things that the government got right. And of course, there are going to be a lot of questions about other aspects around it. But for me, I think those big things do count for a lot.
Thank you, both of you. I will come back to the question on China, really, because the integrated review in the UK gives a different view to China, at least a different relationship regarding China. And for many of us watching UK over the last few years, we have wondered exactly how close would you end up getting to China. What do you see as the future of the UK-China relationship if the UK is going to be as invested in the Indo-Pacific as we think it will be, or as you say it will be?
Well, the integrated review, which was published a few weeks ago now, spelt out the sort of the broad framework for the relationship with China over coming years, it recognizes that China is a country with which we've got a complex relationship, but we need a balanced approach to it, one that recognizes that we're an integrated global economy. The UK is a trading country, and we want to continue to have a strong trade and investment relationship with China. At the same time, the UK is also anxious to ensure that we stand up for the values of our democracy in the framework for our engagement with China. And that means expressing our concerns and objection where appropriate to developments that call into question the values underpinning our relationship. So, China's approach to the crackdown in Hong Kong, for example, met with a strong British response. The Foreign Secretary called out China's crackdown there as an abuse of human rights, and Britain has offered a certain category of residents to Hong Kong, British nationals overseas from Hong Kong who wish to take advantage of it. The Foreign Secretary and others in government have not pulled their punches in terms of calling out abuses of human rights in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. So Britain, wants to engage China. We want to remain an open economy. We don't want to decouple, and we don't want to see the world harden into opposing blocs. Fundamentally, that will be problematic for our economic development and for our geopolitical security. So we need a balanced approach. We want to continue engaging. Of course, India is a partner with which, sort of on the values piece, we have much more in common right now. India is, as I said earlier, a core member of the club of democracies, and it's an important key stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific with which we want to develop even deeper trade and investment ties that enhance our cooperation across all the areas we've been discussing: education, health, climate, biodiversity. It's a key player, and the UK has always, or at least certainly for the last sort of 20 years, been very clear that it wants India to assume its rightful place in global governance, and the UK will always be supportive of efforts to achieve that.
Thank you. It's also it's interesting to observe that both the UK and India have kept China out of the 5G network. So I think that says something else entirely. But to move to the next question, Global Britain and Atmanirbhar Bharat. How do we reconcile the two? Last year, at least the last 3 years, we wrestled with this idea with the Americans when President Trump talked about Make America Great Again, and the Indian government talked about Make in India. So how do we reconcile what is clearly a new attempt towards greater self-reliance or say nationalist manufacturing? How do we do that? How do you reconcile the two? Ashok?
I think both Britain and India, and other democracies as well, but perhaps Britain and India before many other democracies, have grappled with this rather inequitable and almost distorted model of globalization and international trade that we've been saddled with for 2 decades now, at least the past decade, which has caused serious problems for us, not just in terms of trade balance, but also within societies. And there has been a pushback. We have to recognize that. It has also led to a situation at the beginning of the pandemic when we both found ourselves, and so did many other countries, I must add, short of even very basic commodities such as masks and testing kits and PPE kits. There is an obvious crying out for a new model that, as I said earlier, looks at multiple sources, including sources within the country itself for critical products and for commodities. If I want to buy more from the world, I need to have something to sell the world, not just in terms of the financial resources to then be able to buy more, but also in terms of the political capital to go out there and say international trade is worth it. Countries will look for new and complementary models of trade, bilateral trade, regional trade, multilateral trade in this reckoning. And that is where actually there is great complementarity between what Britain is attempting and what India is attempting. We aren't turning our backs to the world. We are in fact embracing each other, but seeking to embrace each other from a position of relative strength, where we both have something to offer the other. So I don't see any contradiction between an India that is focused on building domestic capacities under the Atmanirbhar Bharat rubric, and a Britain that is looking to globalize, but also looking at the Britain outside London, the non-London UK, as it were.
So, Joe, to take on from what Ashok was talking about, in the global Britain that you're building post Brexit, where do you see A, the India relationship, B, where do you see the Britain sort of building its own strength, so to speak? In which areas? Manufacturing, designing, innovation, which areas do you see Britain building its strengths?
Well, the India relationship is a really important one. As I was saying earlier, our ability to deepen our trade and investment relationship with India is an important test of the success of Brexit. One of the key arguments for Brexit was that there was a sort of an EU constraint that was preventing Britain from engaging effectively with countries around the world. The argument being that locked in the EU, we couldn't do trade deals with some of the fastest growing regions in Southeast Asia, China, India, or the Americas, because our policy was entirely controlled by the EU Commission. And the implication of that clearly was that once we left the European Union, we'd quickly be able to negotiate and finalize FTAs with Australia, New Zealand, India, and others. I've always been a little bit sort of more cautious in getting expectations too out of line with experience, because the pattern is quite clear that India does not rush to conclude these agreements. The EU experience was a case in point. Negotiations since 2007 stalled, resumed, stalled. They've now resumed again. Let's see. I think there is a real energy, as we were saying earlier, in the UK-India discussions. I think when the political will is genuinely there on both sides, as I think it would appear, is certainly here on the UK side, and I can see a lot of reasons why the will might now be there as well on the Indian side. When the will is there, real progress can be made. As we were saying before, there is a real sense that countries and companies are looking to build in this resilience and redundancy. India can be a big part of that story if it wants to take advantage of this moment of change in the global economy. But that will require perhaps a change in mindset around the pace at which it wants to engage in discussions and agreements around trade and investment. But that's a sovereign decision for the Indian government, and no one can rush the pace of it. If the balance of interests is there for New Delhi and all of the stakeholders in the Indian system, then progress can be made. But no one can force India to move at a faster pace than it wants, and experience has shown that to be the case over many years.
Sure. I want to move on to something that binds the two countries, which is the diaspora. We have a very large Indian diaspora in the UK. Just as Indian citizens are vocal, I see in recent events have shown that the diaspora is equally vocal about politics in India. However, we noticed that certain tensions did creep in during the discussions on the farmers' protests in the British Parliament. Is it a problem? Is the Indian diaspora, or rather, I won't call them Indian diaspora anymore, but Indian origin British citizens, which part of the story do they identify with? And could that become a problem between the two countries as we go forward? Joe?
Well, I really don't think it should in any way. I think it's to misunderstand the nature of British politics, to think that MPs who have constituents with certain viewpoints won't want to give voice to those positions in Parliament on whatever the issue is, whether it's on Kashmir, whether it's on the Sikh question, Khalistan. That's the nature of having a representative democracy, that MPs represent their constituents in Parliament. It doesn't mean it's the government position, but like any healthy democracy, we want people to feel that they can speak freely in Parliament, and that constituents can find a voice through their representatives. It's an expression of the living bridge. It would be a very odd world in which the living bridge dimension of our relationship had to follow the sort of strictures of diplomatic, communiques, and be bound by the sort of the formal language of the track one relationship. I think that would be a very weird expectation. We've got a fabulously diverse set of democracies in the UK and in India. And in the UK, we're totally relaxed about a multitude of voices coming through in a plural system. And that's just a feature of our democracy. It doesn't mean that it's government position on any of these questions. That's an entirely different matter, and rightfully a domain for discussion and involvement of the two governments. But I think what MPs say in Parliament should be off limits.
Ashok, are we too prickly? Are we too thin-skinned? And certainly is the government too thin-skinned about criticism of its actions, its policies from other countries? And Britain is not the only country where the government has sort of protested against. So should the government become a little more tolerant of criticism as it is within the country?
Let's stick to Britain for the moment. There are 3 points I'd like to make. One, the diaspora for the most part is, to use Prime Minister Modi's words, which Joe just echoed, a living bridge. It's a force for the good, and it brings together our countries in a great way, and may it remain that way. As two very democratic and argumentative societies, we will have opinions on each other's affairs, each other's politics, each other's constituency matters, and so on. There are many Indians who have many opinions on Britain. many Brits have many opinions on India. That's fine. I'll tell you where it causes a problem. It causes a problem when British constituency politics, which is linked to mobilization of particular ethnic minorities, perhaps, or sections of voters, which again is regular. It happens in every democracy. I understand that. When that tends to overwhelm a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in India. Let me give you one example. Let me give you the example of the agricultural reforms that Government of India instituted in 2020. Those are reforms that many of our British friends have been telling us to go ahead with for years. They had positive implications for sustainable agriculture, for market access to Indian farm, for globalizing Indian agriculture and agricultural products, and actually for the ecology, for more sustainable use of water. And yet, none of those points were made in debates in Britain. Now, yes, this is regular constituency politics, and MPs have a right to say what they want. Completely appreciate that. But the management of an important foreign policy relationship or important diplomatic relationship requires some action by diplomats and by foreign office officials, without in any way impeding domestic democratic debates and the autonomy of MPs. If Britain is being misunderstood in India, in my own quiet way, it's my job to try and explain it. It's not just an argument between an Indian who misunderstands Britain and the British High Commissioner here, with me sitting back and saying, this is not my responsibility. I can't intervene and impede on someone's autonomy, but managing the India-Britain relationship is my responsibility. And we expect that from our colleagues in London as well.
I think we are sort of reaching the end of this discussion. I'm now going to ask both of you for closing remarks before we wrap up for today. Joe, you go first.
Thanks, Indrani. Well, look, I think the stars are aligning for a deeper and more comprehensive relationship between the UK and India. There's a lot that is bringing us together right now on the economic front, on the geopolitical front, and on the values front. I think we've got leaderships in both countries that are, certainly speaking for Britain anyway, keen to make rapid progress. We need now to work together to come out of this terrible COVID crisis together, and to then help the rest of the world recover and build back better. So I think there's a huge amount of positive energy in the relationship. I would say there's more positive energy in the relationship than at any time in the last 30 plus years. I think it's a really exciting moment for UK-India relations, and I'm following it with great interest.
Thank you. Sure.
Well, there's very little to add to what Joe said. He's absolutely right. What the summit, the recent summit did was really put down milestones and to be reached, and a roadmap to be followed for the next decade. In terms of climate change and health, in terms of global security and norms, and upholding those norms and values, and ensuring that democracies always win. And of course, in terms of helping each other build more resilient and forward-looking and equitable economies. Britain and India are natural partners, and I think we are finally catching up for lost time. And we will be in a very different place in the next 4 to 5 years.
Thank you, both of you. I look forward to sort of fleshing out what will be a climate change roadmap between the two countries as we proceed towards COP26 at Glasgow in November. Right, for the moment, it is thank you both of you for a fantastic discussion, and we look forward to having more of you in the future.
Thanks, Indrani.
Thank you, Indrani, and thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Ashok. Thanks, Indrani.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.